Happy New Year, everybody, and welcome into the Graham Lincoln Mac Lane podcast presented by Ingles, the official supermarket of Graham Lincoln Mac Lane. Mac, it begins. The offseason, well, we still have, a national championship to be played, but the offseason in the ACC has begun. And so it's time for our ACC Under Review series. What happened? What went wrong? What went right? Mac, we are diving in. We are doing the investigating that you need us to do, people. And we're starting with the team that needs the most investigating of them all, and that's Florida State.
Come on, KG. I love that. Investigative journalism. That's what we're doing right now. That's us. We're putting on our hats and full Sherlock Holmes here to figure out what exactly happened. And as you said, what team better to start with than the team that had the biggest change I think ever in the world. And of course, we have to get our guy Ira to come on, who just knows everything about Florida State. And it's so interesting, as we were piecing this together from a schedule format, I was just like, why not? Let's just start with the Noles and get it out of the way. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. And it was so funny. I'm texting back and forth with Ira, and he's like, I guess this is just like a cleansing, like we're getting it over with. We're just doing. I said, yeah, that's kind of how I'm looking at it too, big dog. So really grateful for his time, and it was cool to see it from his perspective, because I think what's interesting for you and I, KG, is not really, but kind of, we checked out on Florida State. I mean, 5 weeks in, we're like, well, see you later, and to really hear more detail and to hear more about, kind of how it went down, why it went down, and maybe even little writing on the wall that could have been there is really fascinating. So we're always grateful for Ira's time.
Yeah, and Ira, too, a few times he was like, I should have seen this coming. I'm like, Ira, bro, nobody saw this coming. This is not, you should not have predicted 2-10 to start the season. Everyone would have said you were crazy. But Ira is the best when it comes to Florida State coverage. Make sure you follow him at Ira Schoffel. I want to make sure I spell his last name right. SC, of course, I spelled it wrong. SCHOFFEL. Follow him. If you're a Florida State fan, you already follow him. He has millions of followers because he's the best at what he does. But Mac, we, of course, are brought to you by our great friends over at Ingles. And it was, I just want to, obviously, we're sending our T's and P's, our thoughts and prayers to Florida State fans after this season. I also want to send T's and P's to anybody with January birthdays, because it's just hard. No one cares. No one cares about your birthday in January. And my husband's birthday is January 4th. So I tried to care, and of course I cared. I made a homemade, gluten-free ice cream cake with ingredients from Ingles. It was actually a lot easier than I thought, Mac. The hardest part was whipping up the icing, but It was delicious. And I just have to say I'm very proud of myself. So if you have a January birthday in your life, first of all, I feel so sorry for those people, but help them out. Maybe make an ice cream cake, use something from Ingles, or just Ingles has a lot of great pre-made cakes too, cookie cakes, all that stuff. Use that, Matt, because they deserve love too.
Whatever you want to do, whether you want to make it, you want to buy it, Ingles has you covered. And funny enough, both of my brothers, brother-in-law and brother, have birthdays in January. So it's, whatever. I like January birthdays, KG. So anyway, go to Ingles. They got everything you need. I think there's some near Tallahassee too. So if you're in Florida,
perfect.
Go find your Ingles. Let's make it happen. So without further ado, a quick message from our friends over at Ingles, and then we're going to talk to Ira about all things Florida State.
Did you know that Ingles sells more organics than any other store? Or that they run their own dairy? Or that they only serve USDA choice and prime meat? Did you know that they have more local craft beer than any place else? Or that they have Energy Smart stores? Or that they professionally slice and package imported cheese from Europe? Did you know about their giant international aisle, local farm partnerships, curbside pickup, wine department? Or that they donate 3,956 meals a day to local food banks? Well, now you do. It's all in the bag. Ingles, low prices, love the savings.
Ira, brother, listen, I've been waiting on this conversation. It's great to see you. Thank you for joining us again. And it's so funny because, we always discuss kind of these a couple of episodes in advance, and, we're just excited to jump through them and to go through each team's, 24 season here. And Florida State is one for the books, and not in a good way. But great to see you. We'll jump into everything we can. Great to see you, brother. Thank you for joining us.
Great to see you guys too. I feel like I'm being called in the principal's office. Like, hey man, who did this? When did you know this was going to happen? Why did you not come forward? but I'm here. I'm here to take my medicine.
Yeah,
Ira.
KG, I'm glad you sent him the script. KG, I'm glad you sent him all the questions.
Yeah. He knows. And Ira, we know that you did not take a snap or throw a pass, so we know it is not your fault. So yeah, why don't we go big picture, okay? And maybe because you've had some time since the season ended, since the Florida game, to just kind of take it all in. Maybe have your thoughts on this season changed over the last month now that you're more farther removed, or just tell us, unabridged version of what went down?
No, honestly, I felt like I knew probably, I'm going to say probably around the SMU game, I think, is when somewhere in the middle of the season where I realized, okay, they're not going to come out of this. And so now it's just a matter of getting through the rest of the season and then getting to the future. So, that was the tough part about covering this Florida State team is, you start off poorly. They didn't play well against Georgia Tech, then they didn't play well against Boston College, and Mike Norvell's trying to figure things out, and they're making changes, they're changing schemes, they're changing personnel. Then they start playing some younger guys, and you're thinking, okay, maybe they're pushing all the buttons they can push to find something. But when none of that worked, and then you started to see it start, the ship started listing, and you could see it start taking on water. It's like, man, they're not going to come out of this. So now it's just, what's December going to look like? What's January going to look like? So I've really been for the last 2 months, focused on, okay, what is the future going to look like? Because there was no way out of 2024. But, I have reflected on why things went wrong and all the mistakes along the way. Some of those we probably should have seen. Some of them, I don't know if anybody could have foreseen. So, I'm happy to dig into it, but my mindset has been, mainly looking forward for a while now because, there just wasn't any saving what happened in 2024.
Yeah, and it's a great way to look at it. It's a positive way to look at it because let's just move on. It is what it is. But I do kind of want to jump through these various things just to
Sure.
See and get your point, and we might not even ask the right question. You might just have something that you see and know there. But really for me, I think it starts with obviously the amount of talent lost, like the guys that went on to the NFL. That was such a great team a year ago, and it's hard to recover. It's hard to recover from having the most guys drafted in a single year, kind of in program history, and losing the leadership too. Like that's a big thing. Number one, it's the guys, the ballers on the field, but also some of those guys being the best leaders and some of the best leaders Florida State has had in some time. I don't think we all really took in enough account for that, specifically probably looking at Jordan Travis. So was that maybe should have been a bigger indicator in your mind that all this talent leaving and how big of a deal that should and could have been for 24?
Yeah, 100%. And it was like you'd have like individual conversations here or there that probably, looking back, I should have probably clued into a little bit more. I remember early last spring, after they had made the portal additions that they did, you bring in DJ Uiagalelei, a quarterback who had come off a pretty good year at Oregon State. And really, we've talked about this before. His last year at Clemson was not a bad season. So much of, his reputation was based on that first year as a starter, but his last 2 years were pretty good. And Mike Norvell had, shown has a track record with quarterbacks. And you look at some of the pieces they brought in at wide receiver, the speed they brought in, Malik Benson, Jalen Brown from LSU was a speed guy. You had some young guys coming up. You brought in, a portal running back, Roy Dell Williams. So you felt like they brought in some nice pieces, and you had that experienced offensive line. So early in the year, somebody in the media here in the local market made the comment, I think this offense could be more explosive in 2024 than it was in 2023. And when I heard that, I was like, what? What are we talking about here? You just lost Keon Coleman, Jordan Travis. But then as time goes on, you kind of start maybe believing that a little bit, and you especially if the running game had been what they thought the running game was going to be. And to me, when everybody asks where things fell apart, that was it. They greatly overestimated what that offensive line was. They thought because of that they'd really be able to run the ball, and then that would set up perfectly DJ to run some play action pass and use his big arm and stretch the field. And if that all played out on paper the way they hoped, it might have been a really good season. But they could not run the ball. To your point about Jordan Travis, Eric, like that was that's why I think they were so wrong about the offensive line. They overestimated what some of those offensive linemen were. I mean, shoot, last summer, Mike Norvell told us he thought Darius, their senior offensive lineman could be an All-American at left tackle. And it's like, I mean, it's just, so it wasn't just like outside people, they believed it. They started believing that offensive line was going to be better than it was, and it was a complete disaster. Obviously, Alex Atkins now gets fired as the offensive line coach and offensive coordinator, which is what happens when you go 2-10. But really, and then, I don't even blame the skill position players. I really don't blame DJ. I also don't really blame the backup quarterbacks who tried, Truman Hawk, and because it all started with the offensive line. And once they couldn't run block and they didn't have really a dynamic quarterback who could make plays with his feet, I think they were sunk. And, that's so there, there were some things like that on the defensive side of the ball. And I'll take blame for this myself. I thought because of the young, Azareye'h Thomas to me has big time NFL talent. And Fentrell Cypress was, an all ACC guy for 2 years. So even though you lost Renardo Green and Jarian Jones and some of those guys in the secondary, I actually said this to somebody on the staff. I think your secondary could be better this year. And they looked at me like I was crazy. And they said, we lost a 2nd round pick and a 3rd round pick and but it's just this is, I think, what we do sometimes. And so I'll blame myself as well. But there were a few moments like that where if you think back at the comments and statements we made, it's just like, man, what were we thinking? Because that team in 2023 was obviously super loaded with 10 NFL draft picks.
It's not your fault, Ira. I want you to remember that. It is not your fault.
Well, we do want to learn. You want to learn. I mean, I've been in this business for a long time. I feel like I usually keep things in perspective. But I think that's, to me, the one overriding theme with that team and why it failed. And I wrote this in a column, I think, after the Georgia Tech game, if not definitely Boston College game. A lot of that was just based on measurables, and so like my comment about Azareye'h Thomas, if you put Azareye'h Thomas and Renardo Green next to each other, I think a lot of NFL people would probably be more interested in Azareye'h from his physical stature. But Renardo Green was a physical corner that came downhill and was great in run support. Azareye'h didn't really show that much this year. He's a good cover corner. So, things like that. I think on the, in the offense, they got bogged down in 2023 in the passing game because, Keon wasn't, once people realized they couldn't really stretch the field, as good as Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson were, people started really taking away the back shoulder stuff. And the offense, their passing game was really bogging down even before Jordan got hurt. So now you bring in these speed guys and you're thinking, oh, well, this is going to take the top off the defense. And you got a big arm quarterback. So again, it was just like one hypothesis after another, and they all just kind of unraveled.
And one thing that I think people who didn't have a front row seat to the DJU experience at Clemson, like Mac and I think people think DJ is way more mobile than he is. Right. And obviously, to your point, with the O-line, and I think people truly, maybe it's Florida State fans or just nationally, because again, no one thought this would happen, right? No one thought 2-10 would happen. I think people undervalue Jordan Travis. I think Jordan Travis was just a spectacular college quarterback at Florida State and what he did to make up for mistakes and all that. Do you feel like let's look back at kind of the DJU big picture. What did you think? And of course, you have the benefit of this hindsight. What did you think DJU could really be? And what do you think the staff, what was it supposed to look like? That's my question.
That's a great question. What it was supposed to look like was, again, a power running game, which was what Mike Norvell really wanted. He thought they were built for that. And then DJ would be the short yardage kind of secret weapon.
Which he can do. Yeah.
Right. And Mike Norvell felt like where people have gotten it wrong with DJ in the past was when they tried to use him in running on first down or second and long. Like they felt like they could use him as a, 2nd and 2, 3rd and 1, power back. And so that was the goal. The problem was they could never get in those situations.
Yeah.
And so, when you think about once they got into, really the first couple of games, they started dropping him back 40, 50 times a game. That's when I was like, okay, this is not at all what they thought they were going to be. But they couldn't run the ball. But DJ, as far as what we saw in practice, I think it probably was similar to what you guys saw at Clemson and what people saw at Oregon State. He's a guy that 2 or 3 passes in a row, you're just drooling. And then there's a pass or two where you're just like, what happened? Where was that supposed to go? And so I knew he would not be like a very highly efficient passer, but you felt like, if they could run the ball, he could hit some deep shots. He's not going to hit them all, but if he hits some of those deep shots and it keeps defenses honest, now they got to back up, and now you can keep running the ball. And so that was kind of the theory. There was never any point in camp that we felt like, oh, this passing game is going to be really good. And that's not all on DJ either. These receivers, we thought were going to be better than they were. We thought, Hakeem Williams would make a nice jump from first year to second year. Didn't really happen. Destin Hill was a real promising freshman the year before. He blows out his knee in the spring. Malik Benson comes in from Alabama. We thought maybe his numbers weren't, he was the number one junior college receiver in the country, number one junior college player in the country when he went to Alabama. So we're thinking, okay, he's going to be, maybe he didn't have big numbers because Jaden Milroe never got to him as the third option. You kind of tell yourself these theories. And so, but, none of them really panned out. And again, I don't blame DJ for most of that. If they could run, DJ signed up for coming into an offense where he was going to throw it 25 times, run it a few times in key situations, keep the ball moving, and really take advantage of the, hit some shots. This was not the offense he signed up for. And so I more than anything, I feel bad for DJ. I just, and again, Florida State fans, I think one of the things that really hurt him, and this is a silly thing to say because he's a 23-year-old guy that has been played in, the biggest stages possible. But Florida State fans were not super excited when they signed him. Then when the offense looked like it did at Georgia Tech, I feared what was going to happen when they came back home, like what the reception would be. And I talked to EJ and I talked about this in Dublin because the practice, and I don't know if you guys have talked to EJ about this, but they had a practice on that Friday before. This is the greatest mystery of all. The Friday before the Georgia Tech game, they had a practice, their last walkthrough in Dublin. We don't usually get to see those practices. We get to see a lot of practices, but we never get to see the last day. But they call it Fast Friday, the day before the game. And it's, it's up tempo. It's basically, it's what they're going to do. It's what they're going to run on Saturday. And they fly through it. And, you get an idea of how prepared they are. Well, EJ was there. EJ got to watch with the crew. I don't know if were you guys out there? Were you guys?
No, sadly, we were in Connecticut.
Oh, all right.
So we split. So they sent the Florida State alums with y'all, and we stayed in the studio.
Understood. Well, so EJ, because I didn't want to tell you something you already know, but so EJ was there, and that's the practice Nick Saban was at when he famously said they look like a top 5 team. And so I talked to EJ before the press conference with Norvell afterwards, and I was like, how'd they look? And he's like, man, they look good. He's like, the ball never touched the ground. He's like, DJ looked phenomenal, and everything looked sharp. And I was like, well, that's cool. And EJ was like, he's been around enough. He's like, we'll see what it looks like on Saturday, but today that's what it looked like. Then Norvell comes in. Watch that press conference from Mike Norvell the Friday before the Georgia Tech game. He is beaming. He is so fired up about what he just saw. He thinks they're going to come out and be guns a-blazing. And then that first drive, that's what it looked like.
It worked.
But man, what we didn't realize, I think, is when you go back to that leadership part, EMAC, like once they got punched in the mouth and Georgia Tech had a good game plan and Georgia Tech was physical and they weren't going to back down just because Florida State looked good early in that game, that's where I thought Florida State kind of fell apart this season, is they just didn't have enough guys that had been in the fight and been the main guy in the fight. They had a lot of guys who were kind of in the background of the fight, were kind of egging it on, but they weren't guys in the middle of the fight. And I think once that kind of got exposed, I think that's where things kind of started to fall apart too.
Yeah, man, it's such a baffling thing. And it is hard when you just see it on air, when you just see it in practice. Like I even think back to our, practices that we get to go to in camp, and we get to see those guys. But there's nothing else to compare it to, right? You're only comparing it to that team. Like I saw NC State, I thought they were going to be flying around. Thought that offense was really good, and you see the season, that they had. So it's so hard until you have that first game to really know. And then you throw all the circumstances in it. You're going across the country or to another country. You're doing all this international. You're playing on a weird day, week 0. All these different things go into it. And you're like, okay, did that have something to do with it? And then it just snowball after snowball after snowball, and lack of production, like you said. I mean, we knew really quickly that defense wasn't what we thought it was going to be. It was not going to be able to stop the run. It was not going to be able to do all these things. And it doesn't make a ton of sense why, because the guys are there. And what's really going to be fascinating to me, Ira, is some of these guys that have moved on since and are at Oklahoma and LSU, and I don't know the list of everybody, but what are they going to do there? Like, are they going to have big time years? Are they going to do something really impactful? And why didn't it work here and now? Obviously, Florida State also, fires Coach Fuller, defensive coordinator, and, make changes there. So how about defensively? Like, what was the biggest issue there? Because I'm on the same page with you. I thought the defensive backfield was going to be sick and going to be really, really good. So what didn't translate to the field for the defense?
Yeah, it's funny because at that Georgia Tech game, I remember Kelly Quinlan, a writer for the covers Georgia Tech, came up to me after the game and was like, man, that offense is going to be awful this year. And I was like, I think the offense, I think they can figure that out. I think I believe in Norvell. I think you can figure that out. I was more blown away by the defense, to your point. I mean, I thought they got manhandled by Georgia Tech.
Correct.
And then Boston College, same thing. I mean, those teams got whatever they wanted. BC didn't even have to run Thomas Castellanos against Florida State. They just did whatever they wanted. And so that defense did start to come around a little bit. I felt like third, fourth, fifth game. Memphis, Cal. There's a few games in there where they showed some life. The defensive line, Josh Farmer on the defensive line started playing better. Darrell Jackson started playing better. But then I think as the year went on, so I think they kind of could have figured some things out, but the offense just never figuring anything out, I think wore on the defense. And I think those guys kind of cashed it in. That's where that SMU game. Then they go to Duke and they have the 3 turnovers early, and basically they're out of the game early because they know the offense can't score. Like once you're down 17 points with that offense, they knew they were done. And so I felt like that's what happened in the second half of the season with the defense. I think the personnel there was better than it played. And it would have been better, I think, if circumstances had been different. As far as the guys that transferred out, man, a lot of FSU fans would have helped them pack. And that's, and it's not because they don't have talent, but it's just to your point, man, like, where is it? And people thought, Patrick Payton had obviously been productive in the past. You thought he'd be a leader and a guy that kind of, could take over games. Instead, he kind of didn't do much of anything. And then, Marvin Jones Jr. is another one of those I talked about earlier, those things you think, okay, if they hit with this one, because if you watch Marvin Jones Jr. in a workout, I mean, there's a reason Oklahoma just signed him after he really didn't do anything this year for Florida State. I mean, he looks everything you want in a defensive end. It's just once the plays start, it's not happen. It doesn't happen. Whether, once the first play gets stopped, once their first move gets stoned, it's almost like they don't have any other options and they just they drift. And so I'm not blaming those two guys, but overall, I just, and then you talk about Adam Fuller getting fired. I don't think he had bad schemes. I just think the players were not rallying around each other. I think that's one thing you really want to see in a situation where you have a bad offense. The point several people made to me late in the year is you don't see Iowa's never had a good offense, but their defense still plays hard. It's not a pass to not compete. But and so that's where then you turn to the defensive coordinator and say, listen, man, sometimes you got to win this game. You can't count on the offense. You got to get through to those players. And I think Tony White, who they brought in from Nebraska, and some of his guys, I think the hope is that those guys will be able to just bring out some more aggression, energy, passion from those guys on defense.
We'll get to kind of a look ahead after we finish the eulogy, because that's basically what we're doing right now. But overall, Ira, okay, my question is this a bigger college football problem, or is this more of a Florida State problem? Because I know when I listen to your coverage, I listen to other people who are very locked into Florida State. They've always been, except for, of course, this year, I know, but happy with how Norvell coaches in terms of scheme, in-game adjustments, etc. Sometimes the recruiting is a bit of a concern. Now, that is just college football too. Recruiting high school is getting harder and harder. But when DJ doesn't perform and you've got Brock Glenn and you've got Crum and Hope come in who just can't do anything. Now I get it, the O-line, skill players, whatever. But I think back to Florida State. I think back to the Clemson game in 2014 when Jameis Winston is suspended. Sean McGuire comes in and beats Clemson. Like, is that a college football problem where you just don't have backups anymore? You have less room for error? Or is that also maybe more a Florida State problem?
Like Florida State's a little bit of the canary in the coal mine. And I think, man, and I don't know what your guys' opinions are. I haven't heard you guys talk recently about this playoff field, but I don't feel like these are great teams for the most part. I didn't feel like, Arizona State's a play from being in the Final Four. Was that an all-time great team? So to me, I do feel like a lot of these teams now are much thinner.
Yeah.
People make a big deal about Clemson because, Dabo until this year really hadn't done much in the portal. So he's just lost players. He hasn't really replaced them. But even the other schools that do go in the portal are losing top players. I mean, Georgia's losing stars to Ohio State. I mean, you're this shuffling is, I think, leveling the playing field. And so I do think the lack of depth is going to affect more and more teams. And so I think you're going to see more teams that are not great, but are very cohesive, like in Indiana this year or Arizona State, maybe SMU have a big year, have a big run that may not be sustainable in the long term. And then other schools like what we saw this year with Florida State, Michigan, with Washington, some of these schools that you would never imagine to have a season like that are going to start having them. So I think that is a sign of the times. But I also am not giving Mike Norvell a pass. I do think Mike Norvell's a good coach, and I think he's deserves, plenty of time to try to figure this out. And I like a lot of the moves he's made this offseason, but he did not coach this team well. They got worse as the year went on. If you look at, I said this late in the year, the Florida State team that lost to Georgia Tech and probably even BC would have beat the team that played the last month of the season probably by 20 points. They got worse and worse and worse, and that's on your head coach. And so I think he regrets a lot of things he did the last season. But, the good fortune for him in 2025 is he can reshuffle the coaching staff, reshuffle the roster. They're going to have 40-plus new players on this roster next season, and you run it back and hope for better results.
Yeah, it's such just a weird time, man, with all of it. And the way things can be handled, the way literally, as you just mentioned, you can have a brand new team. Years past, you're dealing with that. You're dealing with these guys, and you got to replace them over a 2-3 year period before you get them in. Now, hey, see you later. We're bringing in somebody else, and you have that ability, to kind of do that. What I guess is the biggest thing is we kind of put a bow on this year, and let's do move forward because I think there's some exciting things. There should be exciting things for 25. What is the one or two? I'll throw three if you want to. Things that you have got to see be different this year, whether that's directly from Coach Norvell or from Florida State as a whole.
I think a huge one is from this team is more physicality in practice, and this is one of those things. We do get to watch a lot of practice, but dude, I haven't seen a lot of other practices to judge it against. Like you were saying before, you might see a team against themselves. Well, Jimbo Fisher did not let us watch practice. This may be a surprise to you, but Jimbo Fisher was not about the media coming to practice. Even the tail end of Coach Bowden's tenure, we could watch preseason camp a little bit, but we couldn't. But so I've been doing this for 30 years. I watched some Florida practices in the 90s, but I haven't seen a lot of different stuff. I've never been to a Clemson practice, never been to an Alabama or Georgia. So you just kind of know what you know. But when you see how unphysical they were, I felt like unphysical may not be a word, but that's what they were.
It is today.
Last season, you start to ask, okay, well, why is that? And you think about practice. Florida State, when they practice, it's even when they do collision contact stuff, it's very abbreviated. And I don't know, maybe this is the norm everywhere. But I felt like, just as the strain of a play, and Eric, you can speak to this a million times more than I can, but like, it feels to me so many plays in college football or any football, there's a strain that comes as the play goes on that I don't feel like they're getting that in practice. So I'm curious with Gus Malzahn coming in, his history of, running the football and these, defensive coaches from Nebraska. I want to see that. I think that's a big thing because even that 2023 team, they were very good, man. You had 10 NFL players. Jordan Travis was magical. I don't know that I would say that team was like just a physical team until they had to be those last couple games.
Right.
The AC championship game against Louisville, they certainly were defensively a couple games late in the year when they lost Jordan Travis. But overall, they could not run the ball most of that whole year. BC, I thought, a lot of schools were more physical than them. So to me, that's a huge one. The other thing I want to see is just, in terms of, the leadership and camaraderie. I felt like there was a lot of talk last year, and it's always hard to judge that. But even Mike Norvell in that one press conference that I mentioned earlier, right before the Georgia Tech game, he made a comment that, like, when it gets real, like, what are we really going to see? Like, he's like, I believe it. I believe in these guys. I know they're strong. I know they're fast. But, like, when it comes down to it and you've got to do it, what's it going to look like? And to me, I go back to him and I say, well, as a coach, isn't that your job to figure that out in practice? Like, create those situations so that, like KG, I'm sure, in your practices, you didn't go into a game. It wasn't like a whole new experience. Like you're put in those situations to prepare you for that. And I felt like that was something. So that's another thing that's related to that. I just want to see, can they figure out ways to know what they've got before they go into the games?
Well, especially with a whole new roster, right? You got,
Yes.
or at least a lot of new players, new quarterback, et cetera. I mean, let's get to that. All right. Let's kind of look ahead. I know it is only January. So, Ira, you do not have to be right. But when you look at the forecast, like, okay, Gus Malzahn, Tommy Castellanos, if you had told me this in August, I would have been so confused. Like, wait, what is happening? So, just early returns. Like, what do you think? Obviously, I think Tommy Castellanos profiles much similar to Jordan Travis. Bill O'Brien didn't seem to want to let him run, so maybe he does more of that at Florida State. But what does this look like? What are your early thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny because when Mike Norvell made the changes and he fired coaches before that Notre Dame game. Now everybody's rolling out their hot boards and your wish lists and what's it going to look like, and is Mike Norvell really going to give over the offense, and what could it be? And so you have all that kind of uncertainty, not uncertainty, but like you feel like there's a rainbow of opportunities. Like what could it possibly be? When Gus Malzahn got hired, I think a lot of FSU fans were not enamored by that hire because Gus's career, they played Florida State when he was at Auburn in the national championship 10 years ago. Things kind of went downhill from there a little bit. He ends up at UCF. They start off strong, and then the last 2 years were not really good. He's given up play calling at times. It just, people were just not sure what to think, and he's not really had prolific passers, and everybody wants a prolific passer. But when they got Castellanos, to me, I thought it made perfect sense, and I kind of at that moment thought, okay, Luke Romanhawk's probably done here, because is he going to switch to that new system and be behind Thomas Castellanos and hope for the best 2 years from now? Just didn't seem likely. So when that all fell apart, I wasn't shocked. But it's a departure from what Florida State fans probably want. But I think it's probably the best path to get decent to maybe good in the short term. And I think, you pair them up together. Gus had recruited Castellanos out of high school, signed him at UCF. Mike Norvell really wanted Castellanos coming out of high school, and Castellanos wanted to come to Florida State, but Mike wanted him as a running back. He didn't want to take him as a quarterback. And so I think he really enjoyed beating Florida State last year when he was at BC. And in the year before, he had a huge game. He passed for 300 yards and ran for 100 against Florida State in a loss. So that I think there's a lot of personal connections there, I think, that are really positive. And I think he's going to be a good fit for what's going to should be a better offensive line. They've gone and signed 4 new offensive linemen, experienced guys from other schools. They brought in some nice, transfer pieces at receiver, Squirrel White, Deuce Robinson. They brought in some nice pieces. But I think that Castellanos-Malzahn combination, I think, is what they need to get to decent. Can they get in the playoff? I don't know. Can they get to 10 or 11 wins? I don't know. Probably not. But I think you're going to have a quicker path to 8 wins maybe with this group than in this configuration than if you had gone and brought in a new coordinator and try to hope for the best with Luke Romanhawk in his second year. So that's kind of my viewpoint of it. But I could be I certainly could be wrong.
No, I'm right there with you, and I think it's one of those things where at first it was weird, but let me tell you this: as soon as Tommy got in the portal, I thought FSU was the move. I mean, I just the relationship that seemed to be there, and just again him proximity, growing up near there, and things of that nature, and wanting to play for FSU. On top of FSU getting a front row seat, right, of what he can do.
And I'm curious, you guys, because you've seen him more than I have, because I only watched him when he played Florida State, and you probably watched him more, but he seems like he's got a big personality. And I know that like he did in high school, that was one of the things coming out of high school. And they need that, man. They need that. Like that was one thing where the huge vacuum on that team last year, and this is not DJ's fault because you knew what you were getting with DJ coming in, but that's not him. And they didn't have anybody else. And so that team would just be out. It was like a little league team where you want to go out there and help them. They didn't have somebody to just like to take charge, and so I think Castellanos kind of has some of that in him, right? I mean, I know he's going to make mistakes. Does. He's going to make mistakes, the turnovers and all that. Sure. But I think that would be a positive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't think there's any question about that, and just his the aura that he has, and the verbal leadership and things of that nature. The grittiness, he's going to make plays that get everybody inspired. Everybody like, yeah, that's my quarterback. He's doing that. On top of just his skill set. And that's what, KG and I were so frustrated with this year is like, and really we kind of knew it going in that those reins were going to be pulled back, that, Bill O'Brien is an NFL guy. He doesn't want a bunch of craziness. He doesn't want a bunch of creativity. He wants you to run the offense where a place like Florida State, let me be a creator. Let me do things. Because you just came off a 5-year run of that with Jordan Travis. And so I think getting back to that, like you said, is the way to do it. And now that you have a guy that obviously is very familiar with him, is very comfortable with having that, kind of creator and run game from a quarterback with Gus Malzahn and Coach Mike Norvell, it's going to be a great match, and excited to kind of see that, KG.
Yeah, well, Ira, let's talk expectations here going into this season. You kind of alluded to it. I think, Florida State fans don't forget, but people who aren't Florida State fans who are listening might forget that Florida State opens the year with Alabama in Doak Campbell, which is going to be great. Now, of course, Alabama's got a lot of question marks too. They're figuring themselves out. You've got Florida. You're at Florida and at Clemson on this schedule. Host Miami, host Virginia Tech, host Pitt, at NC State too. So, for Florida State to have most years Clemson, Florida on there, plus a big non-con, it's always a tough schedule. But what do you feel like? Let's do this. What do you think fans' expectations are, and then what are Ira's expectations?
Things are pretty wildly all over the board.
Okay.
Because I think there are some people who are so devastated by 2-10 that there are people who don't think Mike Norvell can turn it around, and they think this thing is broken, and that Jordan Travis was the secret sauce, and maybe Jared Verse and some of those guys on defense, and they don't believe there is definitely a faction of fans who are like, and this is not going to work out. We can't pay him the $60 million. We get it, but we're not expecting him to turn this around. There are some other people who are probably on the other side of the spectrum who are fired up about the changes they made, the guys they brought in, and every guy that you sign out of the portal looks like, you tell yourself that's going to be Jermaine Johnson or that's going to be Jared Verse, and so I mean they and again, I'm not picking on this kid, but they signed a defensive end from Nebraska, James Williams, who had like 5 sacks last year in limited action, but he only played on passing downs, but the fan base is convinced a lot of people in the fan base are convinced he's going to be Jared Verse or Jermaine Johnson. Well, there's a reason he didn't play on rundowns last year in Nebraska, so we'll see. Maybe he develops, but that's the kind of thing. Like you only and we play into this in the media. I'm not absolving myself of responsibility, but like you focus on their stats and all the positives, and you don't think about, well, maybe there's a reason that they're leaving, or and how much success did they really have? So there's some of that. So some of those people are drinking it all in and are fired up and think it's going to be higher. I would say most people think they're going to be I think most people, and I feel like probably 8-4, 7-5 is a good realistic expectation. I don't think Mike Norvell thinks that. I think he's always the optimist and thinks they're going to make a run. And if you look at some of the decisions they made in the portal, tell me that. Like, they were really trying to get that running back that went to South Carolina from Utah State. It was 1,100-yard rusher, face on. I mean, I don't know that they really need a running back, but it's almost like that move to me kind of felt like when they went after Keon Coleman. They didn't really need a receiver, but Mike Norvell was like, that could put us over the top. So I think he thinks that they're going to be back in the mix, competing for the ACC championship. I'm not so sure about that. I do feel like, they're still, they've got to get the stink off of this season. Those players,
right.
The players that were here for the Georgia game and the Orange Bowl and then played through last season, that has got to be still on you,
right.
So they've got to taste some success, have some wins. And like you said, they start off with Alabama. So that's going to be a big challenge. But if they can get some success, then I think, maybe they can win 8 or 9 or 10 games. But until then, I think 7-5, 8-4 is probably what you're hoping for going into next year.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, I think what's interesting, kind of that last piece that you said there, that 40 new guys. So it's not like everybody is going to even know that feeling. They're going to be happy that they're wearing a spear on their helmet. They're going to be happy that they're putting on, an FSU jersey and hopefully that new life and things of that nature. A lot of guys coming in. I'm excited about some of these portal guys. We'll know a lot more after spring, but I do feel like, it just takes a couple of pieces here and there, like the defensive staff you put together, like the new offensive line coach, things of that nature where, you do find yourself back and competing. And who knows, with no divisions, 12-team playoff, let's make it happen. Let's make it happen. But
can I touch
anyway,
on one more? Can I touch on one last thing?
Of course.
Just because I should have mentioned it earlier, sorry. But we just didn't get there. But I think the one, if Mike Norvell learned something from that last portal class, and we've been talking about this a lot, I'm sure other people have as well. But if you look at the big difference between that last portal class that he signed a year ago versus this one is these guys, they've at least played and had success on the college football field. A lot of those guys, from Marvin Jones Jr., Earl Little, Jalen Brown, and not picking on those guys in particular, but there's a lot of guys that they were counting. Sean Murphy. A lot of those guys they brought in from the Alabamas and LSUs and Georgias that really weren't key players or hadn't really got on the field a whole lot, but were highly recruited. They were banking on those guys. This year, they're banking on a lot more guys who have played a lot of college football. It may be at Coastal Carolina and Western Kentucky and Arizona State and other places like that, or USC, but it's not as much blind faith. So I think that's one thing. If you're a Florida State fan, really kind of wanting to believe again, that's what you're going to hang your hat on. A lot of these guys have played a lot of college football,
and that can translate. I mean, Desmond Reed is a great example up at Pitt. So
yes, great.
There's a lot of examples of that. Ira, we appreciate it. Hopefully we'll get you back on once we know, more about these 40 new faces. But hey, sign me up for something new. Sign me up for Tommy and Gus, and we'll see what happens.
That's it. I'm right there with you. Just want to see something new. Just can't see that anymore.
That's right. Appreciate all your time, brother. You're the best.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right, thanks again to Ira for joining us to talk Florida State. I feel like this was a cleansing. I feel like we got the evil spirits out and we looked ahead to next season, which I'm very intrigued by. But Mac, if you also want to cleanse your wardrobe, go to rowback.com. Use our code GMPOD for 20% off. I'm on one today. 20% off, and you can get these awesome hoodies. Mac's wearing the male version. I'm wearing the female version. I love these hoodies. I have 3 colors. I think Mac has like 7 colors. Use our code GMPOD. Get in there.
Kelly, can I just say this? I feel like I'm talking to 2016 Kelly Gramlich from The Roar right now. Like you're just rolling with these sponsorship reads, organically weaving them in. I'm very proud of you. That was brilliant.
Training.
Yeah. So, big shout out. Big shout out to you. Big shout out to Rowback. Big shout out to Ingles. Big shout out to Ira and the Florida State Seminoles. Are they going to be back next year? We'll see. What does that mean? Who knows? It's a tough way ahead. We will get the schedules at some point. I believe a little birdie has told me around January 28th. Mark your calendars.
Wonderful.
Maybe something around then. We will find out really what this road ahead looks like for all these teams moving forward. And who knows, after the transfer portal window opens again in the spring, we could have totally different looking teams. But I'm excited for the Noles. I think that they added some really good pieces like the coaches that they brought in. And a big shout out to Ira always. Also, big shout out to you guys. Always tuning in. We appreciate you so much. We will be back on Tuesday with SMU. Billy Embody is going to join us, as he always does, to sit down and talk all things SMU. The first year in the league with the Ponies and just all the excitement around that program. So appreciate you guys always. Go over to YouTube, subscribe, jump on the channel, turn on your notifications so you get it as soon as these episodes drop. Jump in the comments. Tell us what you think, Noles fans. Welcome back. Good to see you. It's been a little while. But until next time, we'll see y'all.